Welcome to the Essential Self-Care Podcast, a show for those of us who are, let's face it, too busy for self-care. Each week, we bring you real-life stories and expert insights to help you create a kinder, more compassionate relationship with yourself. I'm your host, Dr. Sheetal Ajmani, a physician with over 2 decades of experience blending Eastern and Western well-being practices. As the founder of Radiant Living Institute, I'm here to help you reconnect with your own inner radiance. Remember, small changes make a large impact, and it all starts here. Please note, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Always consult your own healthcare provider about your specific situation. Now, let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Essential Self-Care Podcast. I am so excited today to return back to the show, Dr. Natalie Grigorian, also known as Dr. G. Dr. G was on the Essential Self-Care Podcast a few weeks ago, where she was sharing with us a little bit more from her expertise as an acupuncturist and herbalist. So Dr. G holds degrees in Doctor of Oriental Medicine, and she also has a Master's of Acupuncture from Maryland University of Integrative Health. She works with clients out of her Washington, D.C. office to primarily address issues related to fertility, chronic pain, and women's health. As I mentioned before in the previous episode that she was on, she went more into her expertise and shared that with us. Today, we're going to get a little personal. Dr. G is going to share a bit of her own personal self-care journey with us today. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me again, Dr. Ajmani. I'm really excited to continue our conversation.
Me too. So I always start these episodes with the same question. And that question is, can you tell us about a time in your life where self-care became no longer an option, but an absolute priority for you? And more importantly, can you share with us the specific tools, modalities, mindset, and or lessons learned through that journey?
Well, my entire career, I was a consultant, and I worked for from startup to internationally known consulting firm, and I did what I thought I was going to do, which was healthcare consulting, and I was really good at it. But I don't know if you know anything about consulting. It's demanding hours, and if POTUS wants some talking points, you're going to write those talking points as quickly as possible. And I was giving a lot of my time to myself. I was not taking care of myself. I was young, and I started to get burned out. And it was a time where I started reflecting of what did I want to do? And so that journey, it's interesting because I thought maybe it was the career, the work that I was doing in that company. And the more I would interview out, I realized it was just the work itself. So then I was like, well, maybe I'll just go into politics and work at the White House. And then I realized, why would I do that? That's exactly, I'm just going to be just as burned out as I am now. And so it was actually my husband who was like, you've always loved medicine. You always said you were going to be a doctor. Why don't you explore that? And so I started, exploring what my options could actually look like. And
I want to backtrack a moment, if that's okay.
Sure, go.
Okay. So I want to backtrack here because you did describe, that kind of the impetus was really feeling burned out, right?
Yeah.
And we talk a lot about burnout on this show. It comes up, it just tends to come up in many of the self-care journeys. And it's something that I have personally experienced more than once. And so I just want to, because, part of my intention with this show, and I'll share personally, the first time I felt burned out and experienced burnout was at a time when burnout wasn't talked about. So that word, I don't know if it didn't exist, but it certainly was not as commonplace as it is now. I'm talking about a time that was about 18 years ago. So it wasn't really talked about very much. And so Now I'm happy to see more of a dialogue around it, although although I'm not happy because that means that so many people are experiencing it. Um, but the reason that I am happy to see more of a dialogue on that is that I feel like, by us opening up more about that, people can hopefully feel a little bit less alone than I did when I first experienced it. And so I was just curious, and we don't have to get into all the nitty gritty details here, but just a little bit, if you could just share a little bit of what that felt like for you. Like when you describe feeling burned out, like what did that look like for you?
Well, I don't know about you, but I thought my career really defined me as a woman. Actually, I thought I had to be an executive and prove myself, and so I worked my butt off, like around the clock, and I was not only physically exhausted, I was mentally exhausted, and I knew that I could not sustain that lifestyle. I My husband jokes around. I remember this vividly, like writing a proposal, like an RFP, on my way to a weekend getaway to go skiing with my husband. I literally worked the entire trip just to make a deadline. And my husband was like, if that was me, you would have killed me. I'm glad it was you, but, and that kind of like was a wake up call. Like, am I going to go on vacation and work? Like, why did I go on vacation? Like, why did I even do this? Right. And, and the reason why I did it is because I wanted to prove other people that I was worthy enough. And when I realized, like, I don't know, it like clicked. I was like, I don't need to work around the clock to prove to people that I'm worthy to be heard or to be seen. I don't need to work harder than my male peers to prove that I should have a seat at the table.
Yeah. Oh, that is such a common experience for women. Thank you so much for just your openness and vulnerability and sharing that with us, because I know there are so many women listening right now who can resonate with that. That is just such a goodness. I feel like these days, just a very universal. I don't want to say journey, but many of us can resonate with that of like really trying to prove our worthiness through something external to us, right? And for some of us that's our career, for some of us it's our family, for some of us it's raising our children, right? Like whatever it may be,
Mm-hmm.
but like having this almost like this external measuring stick of our worthiness, and then us just really you know working ourselves to and pushing ourselves to places that are not sustainable to achieve that unattainable measuring stick. Because I work with a lot of women specifically in my coaching and consulting that I do now, and so obviously I do a lot of reading as well to kind of stay on top of a lot of, both with my direct experiences with clients, but also just reading to kind of stay up on top of things that can be helpful to them. And, that is a thing that comes up quite a bit, a lot of particularly high achieving women, as we both are, and as many of my listeners are, having this element of almost perfectionism as well. And so with perfectionism and people pleasing, it's what it is we're creating these goals for ourselves that are not even attainable, and then we're working ourselves into the ground to achieve these goals that are maybe not even attainable, right? This element of perfection, right? And then making ourselves feel bad about it, right? And then on top of that, placing our sense of self-worth and value on that. And I can speak so passionately about that in response and in reflection to what you shared, because I've been there. I still have moments like that too, right? Even in the work that I do,
Yeah.
because it is a journey. It is a continual evolving journey. And those situations, those external situations, often, another interesting thing that you shared, and I've seen this in my own life as well, and that's why I can speak to it, is often what we can do as we continue to move through our journey, and when we might start to see these patterns, is then we put those same things onto other things like you had described. And I've done this also when I through my journey of experiencing burnout through my career when I was practicing Western allopathic medicine, of just thinking, okay, well, maybe it's I just need to find another job, right? Like you described, like looking for another job in the same field, or then looking for another job that's a little bit different, but then even more intense, right? And so I just really appreciate you sharing that. And then I also wanted to comment on two more things. One is that in your description of burnout, you mentioned like physical, mental exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, and in the literature, when burnout is described, that is one of the defining characteristics of it. So I just wanted to point that out for our listeners as well, if anyone is experiencing that as well. And then one thing that has come up in a lot of my work with clients, both one-on-one as well as clients that I work with in group settings, a number of women, specifically with women who are in leadership and executive and positions, is this idea of sustainability. And that's something that I did a whole exercise with in a recent group coaching session that I facilitate for female executives, of really taking a look at. So anyone who's listening, if you want to do this too, I invite you to just think about, like, what does sustainable mean to you?
Mhm.
And what does a life that feels sustainable look like for you, but in terms of all the levels, like your work, your family life, like all of it. Before we go on, I'm excited to share something that could really make a positive impact on your life. Do you feel like you've lost touch with your true self? Reclaim Your Radiance is Radiant Living Institute's signature coaching program designed to help you reclaim your worth, renew your energy, and restore your happiness in your life, career, and relationships. This 6-module program has already helped countless women regain control of their lives. Whether by setting boundaries in challenging relationships, finding strength through life transitions like divorce, pivoting in their careers, or rediscovering their purpose as they embrace new chapters of their life. Start your journey today and begin living authentically, unapologetically, and radiantly once again. Head over to radiantlivinginstitute.com/reclaim-your-radiance to get started. I hope you found that helpful, and if you're ready to explore this more, check out the link in the show notes. Now, let's jump back into today's episode.
I think I'm going to jump in my story. I'm going to be a little non-linear here, but I love that question, because when I opened up my clinic, I told myself, how am I going to design this so that I can love what I do and also be a mom, which I love being, and not have any regrets or grudges that I couldn't be there for either my children or my patients. And so when I opened up my clinic, I was intentional that I was only going to see patients 4 hours in a day for 4 days out of the week. And that was it. And when I tell people, they're like, "That's all?" And I'm like, "Yes. You don't want me to be burned out. You want me to show up 100% and give you everything I have. I want to be a mom." And so my goal is to be a model. Like, I know initially some of my patients are like, "Oh," and then later on they're like, "I love it. I love that you just do that." And like, it makes sense, when they get to know me. But I hope that I'm just a tiny little ripple in the wave that, yes, like my clinic has won 3 times since opening, like best acupuncture clinic in DC. And it takes time and effort to do that. And I still don't have to work around the clock. because I want to show up for my patients fully and be there for them, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I love that. I love that. And it's really, again, redefining
yeah.
what, I think it's, Brene Brown talks about and has talked about, of like in our culture, we tend to wear stress and busyness as a badge of honor. But, I think, what I'm hearing with you and how I really try to set an example, in building my own business, and not just setting an example, that's just kind of a perhaps a byproduct of it, but just trying to be really intentional as I build my business. Okay, I experienced burnout multiple times in the past, and now I'm creating my own business and this structure in my life. So if I end up just feeling burned out again, okay, like, that's kind of
Yeah.
on me, that I need to change some things, right? And not on me in a negative way, because a big part of this
Totally.
show is also practicing
Totally.
self-compassion. It's
Totally.
just part of the journey, right? It's just part of the
Totally.
learning journey. But just, taking time to ask ourselves those questions can just be really helpful in intentionally creating those next steps and carving out that path forward. So I know we really kind of jumped around here a bit, because you were working as a consultant in DC, burned out. Your husband just pointed out to you some things that you've always had a strong interest in. And
Mhm.
then I know we jumped to you having a clinic. So kind of fill in some
Yeah.
of those gaps for us.
Yeah. So yeah, when I was a little girl, I thought I was going to be a doctor, an MD doctor, and very navigating. I mean, like, not to go more off tangent, but when I was 16, I'm half Armenian, half Mexican. So I went to Armenia through World Vision, and it completely changed my life. And that's really why I went in the public health realm. Is just seeing like, for me, it was like, how do I help people in the biggest impact? And so I wanted to serve like the underserved communities. But when I did that reflection later on in my life, that one-on-one really came back strong. And so I started exploring maybe becoming a naturopathic physician. And it just happened that the school down the street was a Chinese medical school, the Maryland University of Integrative Health, and they had a doctoral program that was integrative. Took an integrative approach. So not only did I get my, as you mentioned in the intro, like my master's, I have my postbac in herbalism, but then my doctorate in Oriental medicine, which actually meant, how do you integrate it in today's world? And that resonated. So I went in to the open house, and they kind of started talking about, we were talking about in the previous podcast about Chinese medicine and how it's like this whole system of medicine. There's the, there's a saying like, how does man stand between heaven and earth? And has nothing to do with religion, but just like, how do you connect to your higher self on earth today? And it really made me think. And I was like, I love this. It just makes so much sense. I had received acupuncture. I loved it then, but I never thought it was going to be my career. And in that moment, I was like, you know what? I have 3 weeks to apply. I'm going to apply. If I get in, I'll figure out what I'm going to do with my life. I scrambled to get everything in. And when I got accepted, I knew it was like it was like, it just made sense. There's something about my life when it just happens easily and I don't fight the stream. I know I'm going in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree completely. I resonate with that so much. Oh my goodness. I know there's those things, if you find yourself just like resisting and meeting up against resistance. And then there's other things that just happen so naturally and smoothly. And it's just like, oh, okay. Like that must have just been meant to be, right? But what I want to really draw out from the other thing in addition to that point, because I think that's really great for myself as well as listeners to reflect upon is just those times in your life, right, where you're like pushing, and there's this resistance, and then those other times that things happen so smoothly and naturally. I think it's just such a great reminder to all of us of just all of the dynamic forces at play that kind of lead us forward on our individual journeys. But another thing that I really wanted to draw out from what you shared is just like, take the next step. Like what you shared was like, okay, I have 3 weeks to apply. I'm just going to apply and then I'll see, and then I'll decide. And sometimes I think a lot of people, will stay stuck in certain situations because they're afraid of taking the next step. They think they need to take a huge leap. They think they need to make a really huge shift. But sometimes it's just like, if there's something that's piquing your interest or your curiosity, like, okay, what's sort of the next smallest step, right? Like,
Yeah.
you looked into, okay, this school is down the street. Let me look into it and see what they offer, And then like, okay, I have this 3-week window to apply. I'm not entirely sure yet, but let me just take this next step. And then based on what happens next, I'll see what
Yeah.
happens. Um,
Well, not
and
to
I think that's
interrupt you,
okay.
but
Yeah.
just so like if people are in this and feel stuck, I mean, I was just married. We had just bought a house. And I was like, what are we going to do if I don't have our income? And I think sometimes that really holds us back, that financial aspect of it. And going back to like, I feel very, very fortunate to have a husband who is supportive. Not to like deviate in that like relationship, but he was like, we'll figure it out. And we did figure it out. And going back to like it all, like the stars aligned in many ways that I didn't have to worry about another, because it literally, I was like, maybe I'll become a waitress. I don't know, like to like afford this lifestyle. But it all turned out okay. And
Yeah.
sometimes I don't know if I'm really grateful that I wasn't afraid of like the finances of like my career, that I was able to let go of that, because sometimes I think the finances can be a big deterrent, or at least for me, a big deterrent in taking that next leap.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with that completely, and I'm glad that you brought that up because I think that is a huge part of it. And especially if you are, again, like I mentioned, I work with a lot of women who are, in these very professional roles and high achieving, right? And so there can be that fear and many of them may be the breadwinners of their families as well. And so that fear of like that prospect of perhaps loss of income there or change in income, right? I think that mindset of and obviously, each individual situation is completely unique.
Totally.
Anyone who's listening, take your own situation, right? Evaluate your own situation, and talk to whoever you need to talk to, whether that's financial advisors, a coach, a consultant, a therapist, right? Career advisor, whatever it may be, significant other, certainly the important people in your life. Um, but having that mindset, I think, is really valuable of like, just, we'll figure it out and everything's going to be okay, right? And to me, that's really tapping into that resilience of the human spirit, and of trusting and having faith and following your inner voice and inner guidance. And I do also think, you had mentioned, your husband, and you were like, not wanting to sort of deviate the direction of the conversation, but I think that's an important point too, whether someone is married or not. But with any transition or big change in your life, I think seeking out your support system is really important, because we are social beings, relational beings. And I think having that support system, whoever it may be, is really, really important. Thank you so much. I know there's so much more we could talk about here. There's so many interesting things that came up. Um, but in the interest of time, we'll start to wrap up. And I just want to thank you so much for your openness, your candidness, in sharing a piece of your journey with us today. For anyone listening, definitely, if you did not already tune into the other episode that Dr. G was on, definitely tune into that to learn more about the work that she is doing now. But if people want to learn more about you, stay connected, where can they find you?
Well, thank you again for this amazing conversation. You do such phenomenal work. And if anyone wants to learn more, they can look up Ethereum Acupuncture and Integrative Medicine. Our website is ethereumhealth.com. And my social media handle is Dr. I think it's a dot, Natalie G. That's it.
Great. And I will include those links in the show notes below. Thank you again for being here today.
I really appreciate it.
I know you have so many choices for how to spend your time, so I thank you for being here today with Essential Self-Care. As a gift, download your free workbook, 6 simple yet powerful steps to create your radiant life at radiantlivinginstitute.com and start your journey to a more radiant you.